Hello and welcome to the Creative Couch. I'm Sam Marshall, artist and creative coach. This is a podcast about creativity, confidence, and living a creative life. Hello and welcome to the Creative Couch. We are here on this Monday morning. She's here, she's on my lap, don't worry. Those of you who are on Zoom, you can see her on my lap. So it's a lovely Monday morning, the sun is shining and it's the start of a brand new week. I'm looking out to my garden. I can see all the timber on the garden for my new studio, all the beautiful oak. It's come to a bit of a halt at the moment because the builders are waiting for the cladding to arrive. So what was going great guns has suddenly kind of ground to a halt. Anyway, it's still very exciting. And I'm not bothered if they take their time. I'm in no rush. So yeah, anyway, so that's where I am at the moment. I had an etching workshop this weekend, which went really well. I've got a multi-block workshop coming up this weekend for 2 days. So that's exciting. So lots to prepare for. It's very busy here at Holly Tree Cottage headquarters, as it always is. But once again, thank you for your dilemmas that have come in this week. Lovely set of dilemmas. Do keep sending them in, please. I need more. I need more to keep this podcast running. So yeah, do send them in, but thank you to everybody who sent them in this week. So today I'm answering Magdalena's, I'm answering Kari's, and I'm answering Jennifer. So Jennifer sent in a bunch of dilemmas, but I'm just answering one of Jennifer's dilemmas today. Otherwise it will be going on for quite a while and I've got to wrap this up by 12:15 because I've got a coaching session. Anyway, let's move on. Right, Magdalena got in touch because she said that she saw one of my Instagram stories or posts where I talked about that sudden moment of awareness when you realize that you're the one leading the room, like I talked about when I was in France a few weeks ago. I was teaching this wonderful group of women and suddenly I had this moment of like, oh my goodness, I'm supposed to be leading this. And I think those moments that happen when you're teaching or when you're giving a presentation can be really alarming because you suddenly become really hyper aware of yourself. And she's got a presentation coming up and she's feeling anxious about it for exactly that reason. When you realize that all eyes are on you and you become very aware of yourself. She describes that kind of pressure that comes with being the person at the front and is asking how to cope with the nerves and self-consciousness that can show up in those moments. So this is a great dilemma and I'm going to answer it from a teaching point of view and I'm also going to answer it from a presentation point of view. And it's actually been really helpful for me to think about this because I'm doing a book signing in Whitby at the end of the week and I'm going to have to give a talk. So it was quite helpful for me to think about this and think about how I prepare myself for these sort of events. Anyway, so the emotional layer behind this is actually very understandable, isn't it? At any time you have to get up and do something in front of other people, there's going to be a feeling of vulnerability. You know, you're standing up there and giving a presentation or giving a speech and there's going to be nerves because you've got this sea of faces in front of you and they're all looking at you with kind of expectation and there's a pressure on you to deliver. And I think that is inevitably going to cause nerves. But I think the thing is, I think that the important thing to remember is that the nerves show that you care. If you didn't care, there wouldn't be any nerves and you just go up there and say anything. So you're starting from a good foundation here. The fact that you're nervous, I think, shows that you care. And I'll go back to something we talked about right at the beginning of these podcasts about, you know, reframing the nerves as excitement. You know, instead of saying I'm really nervous, you could actually say to yourself, I'm really excited about this presentation, because I think the way that you talk about your feelings can actually affect how you're feeling. So, you know, I'll always go into a situation like teaching or giving a talk saying, you know, I'm feeling excited, because that helps me sort of settle into it a little bit better. And I think the main point to remember here is that people are there because they want to be there. They're not waiting for you to fail. They're not waiting for you to mess up and to laugh at you. They're there because they want to be taught by you, or they're there because they want to hear what you've got to say. If you remember that and think about them as being your friends in front of you, I think that can take the pressure off a bit. So let's talk about the practical layer. And I'm going to talk about teaching first, then I'll talk about giving presentations. So teaching for me is always very much about creating an environment. You know, I've always based my teaching on good teaching that I've experienced in the past and bad teaching that I've experienced in the past. So I have crafted my way of teaching through many years of being taught. So I have a very I've got a very welcoming way of teaching. I'm somebody who likes to create a very safe environment, a very comfortable environment, a very relaxed environment. So I will always start my teaching sessions with introductions. So I'll always say, could we just take a moment to introduce ourselves, just so that, you know, I get an indication of where people have come from, what level they're at, and also just a really nice way for everybody to get to know one another, get to know their name. So I'll always start off with the introductions, and I will always say that I'll always set the tone. So I'll always say something like, you know, we're here to have some fun. There's no pressure from me. We're just, you know, let's spend a few hours together making marks on paper or printing or whatever. You know, I always say no pressure from me. You know, I don't want any tears. I say that quite a bit because, you know, there has been tears in workshops before when people's work hasn't gone the way that they wanted, you know. So I set the tone. I come in. You know, I'm very comfortable teaching now. I've been doing it for so long that it doesn't faze me teaching. But, you know, I think that these things, if you can anchor yourself, if you can have a kind of a little bit of a routine that you do when you're teaching, I think that can give you a sense of structure and help you feel like you've already got a solid base to start with. And then as soon as you've done that, then you know, and you've done your demos or whatever it is that you're doing, you know, take the focus off yourself and get people involved, so that the more that they're doing, the less it feels like you're being watched. You know, just get them making as soon as you can, so that then, you know, then they start to learn off one another, the conversations start to happen, and you then don't become this person at the front dictating what's happening, but you're the person who's weaving in and out of the creativity that's going on. You know, keep it conversational, you know, keep it lighthearted. Again, it depends on what teaching environment you're talking about. I mean, I only teach adults now. I don't teach children, thank goodness. I've done my time. And the thing is, with teaching, you're guiding, you're not performing, you're just guiding. You're there to lend a hand, you're there to offer your expertise. And it will never be perfect, except that it's going to be messy, except that things go wrong, except that materials aren't going to be there, or, you know, somebody's going to turn up half an hour late and you have to slightly repeat yourself again. All of those things are going to happen, and you just have to cope with it the best you can. So I think that's it, you know, with teaching, you know, develop your own way, understand what kind of teacher you are, and make that clear. I will always say, I make it clear, people who come to me for my workshops, to my retreats, they come because they know what kind of teacher I am. And I think if you've been following me for a while, you'll know who I am. You'll know what kind of personality I have. You know, I am very generous. I am very supportive. I am very enthusiastic. You're going to get a lot of enthusiasm from me. And I like to create a very safe working space. I am not somebody who's going to tell you that you need to do it like this. I'm not somebody who's going to be really directive with how I teach. Now, you might want somebody who's more like that. You might want somebody who says, this is how you do it. I'm not going to be that person. I mean, obviously with printmaking, it's different because there are definite ways of doing it. But with drawing, I don't do that. So you figure out who you are as a teacher. And I think then you get the right kind of students who come to you for that, you know. I mean, the people who love botanical, I mean, I say this because the person who was coming after me at Clos Mirabel, you know, she was a botanical artist, botanical illustrator. You know, the people who are going to be attracted to her workshops are not necessarily the people who are going to be attracted to my workshops. So figure out what kind of teacher you are, figure out what kind of style you are, and then base your classroom energy around that, if that makes sense. Right, presentation. I've given lots of presentations in the past. I remember really clearly the biggest one I've ever had to do, and the kind of very early on in my teaching career, was at the Royal Drawing School. I had to give a presentation to the foundation group that I was teaching. So to the foundation. It was like an open day, and we had, oh my goodness, loads of students, prospective students. We had loads of prospective students, mums and dads, and I had to give the presentation, and I was really nervous. And I prepared and I prepared, and I you know, I spoke the presentation out loud. I recorded myself. I videoed myself. I got my I got some friends to come and watch me. So I went overboard with that. And it did go really well, but I was really nervous. And I think that almost going into the deep end of having to present like that with loads of people, actually, once I'd done that, I became much more confident doing it. But I think the thing is, practice out loud, practice speaking rather than just reading, practice speaking out loud. And that makes a huge difference. And I do think recording yourself is really, really helpful as well, because you get to realize, the things that perhaps you stumble on, or things that you repeat. I mean, it's interesting me watching back these podcast episodes, because I realize there's certain things that I keep repeating. And I want to try to be a little bit more mindful not to do that. So record yourself, that really helps. Know your opening, know your first few sentences. And I would always say, don't stick rigidly to what it is that you've written. Like with me, I mean, I make copious notes for all of these podcast sessions, but I go off track. I kind of, something will come to me as I'm talking, and I like to kind of incorporate that into what it is that we're talking about. So, have your structure and have your timings, but allow yourself to deviate if things go a little bit off track. One of the biggest things I can say is make yourself human early on. So even if it's your first presentation, I think I did that presentation. I just said, look, this is the first time I've ever done anything like this. I'm really nervous or excited or whatever. I think I said, just be gentle with me, and that, everybody laughed. I immediately felt like people had got my back. And then I was able to deliver the presentation in the best way that I could. And focus your attention. I think this is important, but it's all very nuanced, this, isn't it? But focus your attention on what you're saying and not how you're being perceived. Because I think you can easily get derailed by looking for people's reaction to what it is that you're saying. And it could be the case that you say something, you look at somebody's face, somebody looks disinterested, and suddenly you start spiraling into, oh my goodness, that person looks disinterested. I'm obviously not doing what I should be doing. I'm obviously saying the wrong things. So try and keep your focus on what it is that you're saying. Absolutely scan the room, but don't try and get derailed by people who look disinterested, because you will always get people who look disinterested. You will always get that. You will always get people who are just kind of like staring into space, or looking down, and that's not, but they probably are listening. Maybe no, maybe not, but you will have people who are listening. I mean, they always say, don't they, when you're giving public talks, or you're speaking publicly, to kind of address your audience, make eye contact with people. And I do tend to do that. I do a scan at the start, and I think, right, I've got eye contact with that person's reacting when I say things, so do have people, I would say, in the audience that are genuinely responding to you, but don't take it personally if there's somebody falling asleep. I haven't ever had that, but there's still time. So if you have a reset point, so I would always say, if you do lose your thread, then always have something that you can keep coming back to, if that makes sense. Have a sentence that might just kind of give you that anchor and kind of help you get back on track. How are we doing for time? We're okay, right. So homework, rehearse it out loud. That's the first thing. Record yourself, present it to a friend. Write and learn your opening lines, and decide your tone in advance. Again, a bit like the teaching style. Decide how you want to come across. Do you want it to be informal? Do you want it to be formal? Do you want it to be engaging? Do you want it to be funny? Etc. And anticipate that fact that suddenly you will have that moment where you are thinking, oh my goodness, everybody's looking at me. But just recognize it and move on. Don't feed into it. Just think, oh my goodness, I can suddenly see myself being watched. It will go, the feeling will pass, and you'll move on through it. I'm sure you're going to be brilliant, Magdalena, if it hasn't already happened. So thank you for that. That was a great dilemma. Okay, so Kari. Now this is a really juicy one, Kari, and thank you for sending it in. There's lots of layers to this. So I've tried to, I mean, I could just talk about this dilemma all throughout the whole podcast, but I've tried to kind of condense it down and keep it to the main points as to what it is I think you're saying, and hopefully give you some guidance. Okay, right. So Kari is preparing for a group exhibition in July. Okay, so let's just remind ourselves where we are now. So we are now at the end, almost at the end of April. Kari is preparing for a group exhibition in July and feels pulled in multiple creative directions. She currently has 3 different bodies of work on the go, some looser plein air oil studies, a more developed series of Australian magpie paintings, and a newer, more experimental body of work exploring darker, enclosed bush environments using charcoal and oil. She says that the challenge is that the third direction is the one that she feels most excited by. It feels more personal and pushes her work somewhere new, but it's also the least resolved and feels the most uncertain. She's torn between committing to this riskier dilemma, which may not come together in time, and falling back on work she knows how to resolve and sell. Okay, so the next thing is important. Alongside this, she's comparing herself to the friends she's exhibiting with, who seem to produce finished, more saleable work with ease, while she feels stuck in a more experimental and unresolved phase. Oh goodness. Okay, so that is juicy. That is very layered, and there's a lot of stuff going on here. Now, the thing is, it sounds to me as if Kari is really excited about this new body of work because it feels more personal, the way that you're talking about it. It feels like it's a new direction, and it feels there's something quite alive in there. But alongside that is fear, because there's this feeling of, will it work, and will it work in time, and will it be good enough to show? And I think that that is too much pressure to put on a new body of work. I think that already that's a lot of pressure for that sort of early stages of a piece of work or a body of work to put on it at this stage. And then on top of that is this element of comparison where, you know, she's watching people produce work where they're obviously in a kind of, you know, they're obviously in a stage with their work where they can produce something quite quick because they've been working in that way for a while. But at the moment, Kari feels like she's in the messy middle with all of this. So I think at the moment, this experimental work feels even more riskier than it actually is. Now, the fact that this new work feels uncertain doesn't necessarily mean that it's the wrong direction. In fact, I think it's the right direction for you. But I think that at the moment, what is happening is that there's too much pressure on this new body of work to be in a space, to be resolved, and to be in a show in July. Because I mean, realistically, what you've got, what, a month and a half, 2 months? So my feeling is you're trying to move somewhere new here, Kari, but I think this needs to have time for it to develop without having the pressure of it being resolved and finished by July. Because I think the key thing here, what will happen, sorry, I've got really itchy nose. I've got my, I feel quite hay fevery at the moment. I think the thing is with this new body of work, the problem here is that you've already mentioned sales. You've already mentioned this comparison with your friends about selling. So this gives me the sense that this show will be a selling show. And you will start to, what will happen, and I can almost guarantee this, is if you start to push this experimental work to be the stuff that is going to be shown in the show in July, you'll start to think about, how can I make this sellable? And I don't think that's the right place for this work to be in at the moment. I feel like this experimental work that you're working on, this has a darker kind of edgier feel almost. It needs to grow. It needs to take its own time. It doesn't have to have the pressure of being condensed and realized in a couple of months and be ready to sell. So I think we need to separate the exhibition from the development of the work. So I think that the experimental work is development at the moment. It needs space. And I think that that's the very thing that makes it exciting at the moment, is that it's new and it's evolving. Give that time. Don't put the pressure on it to be exhibited by July, because I think it will flatten it. I don't mean abandon it. I just mean protect it. I think protect it from the pressure to be resolved and to be in a sellable place by a couple of months. Okay. So That's my feeling. That's my feeling. And that might not be what you wanted to hear, but I think it's the most sensible route at the moment. I think if you, it sounds really exciting, and I really would like to encourage you to keep going with that body of work and let it take let it take its own direction rather than it being forced into this kind of, exhibition in July. Right. So then I think we need to choose a clear lane for the exhibition, because it sounds like you've got these three bodies of work. We've kind of parked the last body of work because that's going to be ongoing. The two other pieces that you've got here are the plein air sketches, oil sketches, and the more resolved Magpie series. And the question here, I think, is what can you realistically make, resolve, and stand behind before July? That's the question really you need to answer, is, which one of those two would you feel more comfortable bringing to some kind of resolution, maybe getting them framed, maybe figuring out different ways to present them. Which one of those two do you feel more aligned with at this present point? Okay. And again, let's try and sort of take the pressure off selling, unless it is that you desperately need to sell these. Well, and if you do desperately need to sell them, then you probably have to start to ask different questions. But I think from what you've told me, Kari, your person here, it's very much about your development of your work. And I don't necessarily think that you're thinking about these selling out. I think it's very much about who you are as an artist. But obviously, it'd be nice if they did sell. So that's the question. Okay. So I would also say, and I think this might be quite an exciting route for you, is that actually, yes, choose one of those routes, the plein air or the Magpie series, but perhaps show a little tiny bit of the new work. So it could be you're just showing a little glimpse of it, maybe one piece that might just show the suggestion of things to come, perhaps. You could create a little bridge there for this new body of work. Just a thought, just a thought. So I do want to also just touch on this whole comparison thing that's happening when you're going out with your friends who are obviously exhibiting in the exhibition. Because what it sounds like to me is that they sound like they're in a different place with their work. It sounds like they've probably been working in a really similar way for a long period of time, whereas from what you've told me, you're still in a very experimental phase where you're figuring out your own style, you're figuring out your own language. So what you're seeing is probably, they've been painting outside for years and they have developed this way of kind of bringing pieces to resolution, whereas you are still in, and that's not a criticism. It's not a criticism at all, but it might just be that you're in a different stage of your art practice at the moment. So I think try and separate that again, to keep trying to kind of stand back and separate that. And also it might be that, it's difficult, isn't it? I've been in group exhibitions with people and, some people have sold more than others. And there is always that kind of slight awkwardness about, if you're the one who's selling the most, you feel awkward because other people aren't selling, or if you're the one who isn't selling, you feel perhaps a slight resentment for the people who are selling. It's always going to be awkward, except that is going to be something that you will have feelings about. You will have feelings about it. It's kind of inevitable, but that's the nature of exhibiting with other people. And it is something that I think you get used to over time. Right, so homework, make 2 lists. What work could I confidently bring to the exhibition in July? And what work am I excited to develop regardless of the outcome? Because I think they're 2 different things. And I think keep them separate. And I think the second one is obviously this new darker sort of work that you're exploring with charcoal and oil. Choose one direction for the show, keep to it. It might feel less exciting, but it means that you'll be able to pull it together in a very unified way. And I think it will create less pressure, because you always think that you have more time than you do. And then I think even though in the preparation up to the exhibition, ring fence that time for the experimental work, ring fence some time for that experimental work to still occur. And then, the comparison, when it happens, just acknowledge it, know it will pass, because it will pass, and step away from it. I also feel that, with comparison, one of the things that's always really helped me is it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because if you're comparing yourself to comparing yourself to one of your friends who's an artist, you know, they sell their work. You are genuinely happy for them because they've sold their work. But it also is a little bit of a sting for you because perhaps you haven't sold your work. The way that I've dealt with that in the past is acknowledge that part of you that is really great and really happy for them. And I will phone up and say, or I mean, one of my friends, Perienne, I can't remember. It was a long time ago. We were in an exhibition together. Her work was selling, mine wasn't. And I had good feelings about Perienne's work that was selling, but I also felt a little bit like, oh, why isn't mine selling? You know, I went up to Perry and I was like, well done, darling. Well done. That's amazing. And as soon as I said that, that other bit that was holding on to, oh, I'm a little bit upset, that disappeared. So I think, you know, build up build up the sense of joy that you have for your fellow artists that are selling. And if you could acknowledge it and say it out loud, it does help to diminish the other bit that's feeling a little bit resentful. Okay. I hope that's helpful. I have kind of told you what I think you would be best for you to do here. It might be that you don't agree, and it might be that you do want to go on and develop that work. I just think if you'd have told me that you had an exhibition coming up in November, then it would be different. But because it's July, there isn't a lot of time, and you've got to get all the pricing, all the framing, all of the marketing, all of that sorted out. So that isn't a lot of time to bring together a new body of work and resolve it. Okay, hope that helps. Thanks for that, Kari. Excellent question. Right, let's move on to Jennifer. Just making sure I've got time. I've still got 10 minutes. This is going well. Okay, so Jennifer sent a much longer email with lots of different dilemmas, but I'm going to answer the one about shipping. So this is much more of a practical rather than emotional. Sorry, I'm just giving Marple a kiss. She's got, look at that, all that yogurt on a, I think it's yogurt. Maybe it isn't yogurt. No, it is yogurt. Gorgeous, gorgeous girl. Jennifer sent in the longer dilemma. But this is more about shipping because she's worried about shipping artwork, had lots of questions around shipping. And obviously I've only really got experience of shipping prints, but I did get in touch with a couple of my friends about shipping canvases and bigger pieces of work. So hopefully their answers will be able to kind of direct you. So she said that she's worried about how to safely package and send different types of artwork, including framed paintings, canvas pieces, and unframed works on paper. She's also unsure as to whether it's safe to roll works, whether it could cause damage, and whether it's better to send things flat. On top of that, she's wondering how to approach pricing, whether to charge separately for the shipping or include it in the cost of the artwork. Okay, so I think the emotional layer of this is the whole thing about sending out your work, because once you've sent it, you're no longer in control of it. You know, you put it into a system and it's gone, and it can be, I mean, I know from years of selling work and handing it over to Royal Mail, there's always a sense of, oh my goodness me. And, you know, you do get those emails from people saying, this hasn't arrived. What can we do about that? You know, and often for me, it's a matter of refunding, because tracking something that's gone missing in Royal Mail is a bit of a nightmare. Anyway, so but it is part of being an artist. Sorry, I've just got a text message just come in. I should have muted everything. I normally do. I thought I turned my phone onto airplane. Anyway, you don't want to let the buyer down. You want the work to arrive in the way that you would want the work to arrive. So I think but I do think it gets easier the more you do it. The more experience you get, the easier it will be to come up with a method that suits you. So framed works, how I frame, I mean, I don't really sell framed pieces of work, but I have shipped framed pieces for exhibitions. And how I do that is I wrap them in bubble wrap, I protect the corners, and then I wrap them in newspaper, and then I put them in the box and make sure the box is really packed well, and then I will send them. So that's how I do that. I just pack it really, really well. It might look a bit ugly, but it's packed really, really well. And that is probably the case as well for framed paintings. Canvases, they're often more robust because obviously they don't have glass, but you want to make sure that you protect the actual surface of the canvas. And then again, with bubble wrap or newsprint, protecting the corners again. Again, it depends how big these are. I mean, if you're talking about really large canvases, then it's probably better to get some kind of I don't know, you can get those art packers for you. I mean, again, I've never used it. I'm not a painter. I've never had to ship large paintings. But if they're smaller, then it's sort of the same process. Pack them well, pad them well, put them in a box and send them the best way you can. Right, unframed works on paper. So I always, I use book mailers, which are basically sort of cardboard folders that fold over. I use those depending on the size of the print. When they get bigger than A3, my prints, I do roll them. And that for me is the safest way. Even though it does arrive rolled up, it's much better and safer than sending a large print with loads of cardboard on it, because inevitably it will get bent and you'll get a complaint. I've had that before. So once I'd had a couple of complaints about that, then I decided to roll them. And I felt uncomfortable about rolling them when I started. I have to admit, but I will always tell the customer to, as soon as they get them, unroll them, put them underneath some heavy books, and then they will be flat in no time. So that's the way I do it. Obviously, with prints, the ink is dry; it's not going to crack. With collages, I would be really careful of rolling them, as I would with paintings, because obviously they can crack. So I only have my own experience with prints here. But yeah, absolutely. Past a certain size, they go in a tube and I roll them, and I feel much better about that than I would sending them packed up. What else? Like prints, like I say, it is pretty standard. A lot of prints do come in a tube, even though it does feel uncomfortable when you're rolling something that's taking you so long to do, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, my customer at the other end is going to get this rolled up thing. But I'm sure that the customer would much prefer to get a rolled up print that they have to gently unpack and flatten than getting a print that's got, it's been torn at the edges, or the packaging has been bent, or whatever, because you see how they treat the parcels. It's not great. I mean, it's your job as the seller of your art to package it in the best way that you possibly can. But again, there isn't what I'm trying to say here, there's not a right or a wrong way. Well, the right way is to package it the best way you can, obviously. But depending on your artwork, you develop your own ways of packaging. For me, even if my packaging doesn't look particularly neat, that's just the way it is. I would rather it just be a bit of a messagey packaging, but absolutely perfect inside. So you'll figure your way out with that. You'll figure your way around that. Not your way out. You're going to figure your way out of a package. You will find your way with it, but it does get easier. Okay, in terms of shipping, what do I do? So I basically make sure I all my shipping is as fair as I can do it. I only, sometimes I charge less, sometimes I charge more, slightly more, and it all rounds out in the end. So say something like to ship a print in the UK, it's normally about £5 for me. £5, I charge the customer £5. It's generally about £3.75 to send something small package, 48 hours tracked. So I've got a small margin for my packaging. So that's how I do it. I just add a tiny little bit more on, not too much. I really try and keep my shipping costs as much as I can. Some people increase the cost of their prints and they don't charge shipping. It really depends. It's a very personal thing. I would rather charge a reasonable amount for shipping, just because it works out better. It's easier for me in terms of tax and keeping track of Royal Mail and all that kind of stuff. So that's how I've chosen to do it. Speak to other artists, they might say something different, but I try and keep it as reasonable as I can. So I just there's a tiny little bit of wiggle room for the cost of the materials and the packaging and my time, etc. Anyway, listen, hope that's helpful. Marple's in the background now. She's got off my knee. She's bored. Oh, wow, I've managed to do that. I'm really chuffed. I've got 2 more minutes before my coaching session with Nina. Listen, guys, thank you for tuning in. Again, please send in your dilemmas. Do like or subscribe. to this podcast. I know that's the thing that you're supposed to say at the end, and I keep forgetting to say it. So if you like it, subscribe, leave a review, that'd be amazing. And let's keep this podcast going. So please keep sending your dilemma in, no matter how silly you think they are. They're not silly. I love this. I love reading them, and you know, thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing your dilemmas with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you, guys. I'll see you next week. Am I recording? God, that would be a nightmare, wouldn't it? I think I'm recording.